to What the Fertility Season 3. Amanda and I are sitting down today with Rebecca from RPL_Mom on Instagram. Rebecca talks about recurrent loss. She is an advocate in sharing validation and education for women going through multiple miscarriages. But before we get to Rebecca, we just wanted to do some housekeeping items and talk about jumping on our Instagram, which is at What the Fertility Pod, going to Spotify and Google and giving us a 5-star rating, and just subscribing too. It's going to help us out a ton as we move into season 4. So if you could follow us on Instagram, we do share sneak peeks a few days before the episodes air. And then Amanda and I also share on the Instagram kind of where we're at in our journey. So we would really appreciate that. And then we are also working with several different, what would you say, Amanda? Several different
like brands, I would say, right? Brands, products.
Yeah.
We're partnering with different companies currently, which is really fun and exciting.
Super fun and exciting because we just haven't done that in the past because Amanda and I weren't really walking through fertility journey. And so now that we're using some of these products, we are super excited to share them with you. One of the first ones that we're working with is Mira Fertility. So we do have the 17% off with the code WTFPOD17. And that link is also in our bio. It'll take you right to their website. Again, the code's WTFPOD17. And then we have a couple more fun ones to come. I know I'm really excited, Amanda, for the one that you're going to work with for your next transfer.
I know, this is so exciting. So definitely check them out, Mira Fertility. And like we said, we'll link them and everything on our like Instagram and everything.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and chat with Rebecca. We have a Rebecca on this morning who hosts the Instagram platform RPL_Mom, where she is an advocate sharing validation and education for women going through recurrent loss and miscarriage. Welcome, Rebecca. We are so excited to hear your story and hear a little bit about how RPL Mom got started.
Thank you so much for having me. This is my first time kind of coming on a podcast and sharing my story. And I felt it really important because actually when I was going through recurrent pregnancy loss, I actually found your episode, one of your episodes. And so as I was going back, podcasts really became like a way for me to connect with women that I didn't have in my real life. And so I think coming full circle is really cool. And I am really happy and thankful that you asked me to kind of come on. Okay, so I'll start kind of just with who I am and a little bit of background. And I try not to apologize for emotion because it's hard. And I think that we are pressured to think that it's not hard. And that's not a narrative that I perpetuate because it's not true to my story. So, and also I'm on day 2 of stimulants for an egg retrieval. So take that for
you have a lot going on. If you haven't followed RPL Mom, do so. She all of the stuff you share, it seems like it's so from the heart. It's unique, it's raw. And I've noticed, I'm like, I don't know how you must just be so creatively and like driven and have really good English skills, because I swear all of these posts, I'm like, how does she go there? But it's because you're living it and you're walking it every day, which is so beneficial to build a community when you've really walked those shoes.
Yes, and I tell you that most all of those posts come from me waking up at 5 a.m. every morning because I'm an early riser, over 1 or 2 cups of coffee and just reflecting on a certain aspect of my situation. And they kind of just write themselves. It honestly just feels like it's poured out for that one moment in time. And that is the secret behind how most of the posts are curated.
Oh, I love that.
And then they are hit posts before I leave my house in the morning. And that's just it. That's just it. But yeah, so I am 28 years old right now, and I have had 4 pregnancy losses. And for me and my motherhood story, I have 4 babies in heaven, and that's how I see my journey. And I'm a wife. I've been married for 5 years, and reading your bios also, I think that perhaps we all kind of got married in about the same fashion. For us, it'll be 6 years in February. We have 2 rescue dogs that we adopted because they were really cute at the, place where you adopt dogs. We didn't put a lot of forethought into it, and but they're the loves of our lives. They take up like 2/3 of our camera roll, and sometimes my husband and I communicate by only sending pictures of the dogs back and forth. So they're a big part of our life. But I met my husband my senior year of college, actually online. And within 2 weeks, we had gone on 4 dates. It was a bit of a whirlwind romance that at the time made my dad kind of hold his breath.
Oh.
They're like, okay, you're really going for it. And we just went for it. But, it all worked out. And I'm really just thankful for having met him, because we truly had no clue what was ahead. When you get married, we had people like talking to us about our children and, you're going to make such a good parent. And I think when you get married, people, at least in our circle of influence, were asking us, when are you going to have kids? And nobody ever said to me, what if you can't have kids? Or what if this time that's supposed to be so exciting is actually the most traumatic time of your entire life? And so here we are. So when we got married, we just wanted a couple years to hang out and enjoy our marriage. We bought a house, we settled down, we did some DIY, which is why I see your trim in the background. I just got a nail gun for my birthday, so I'm like trimming it up.
Your story sounds so similar to mine. Like, got married, and bringing it up, no one said that to us either. And I never thought about that until you said that. Like, it's just not common, but it is commonplace for infertility.
Exactly. And I think that it makes you feel so isolated in the beginning, because your journey is so far from what was promised to you and so far from what it looks like for, most other people, right? So yeah, it's been a journey. But after some DIY, I went back to school and I wanted to get my master's degree. And so I did that before trying to conceive. I graduated like May of 2021. And we were like, okay, let's try to conceive at the end of 2021, which is a little bit sooner than we had planned. My granddad was actually diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, kind of mid to late 2021. And so I was like, okay, let's get pregnant. Let's be able to share this news with him with the 6 months that we have left, which is what was told to us. And part of that is so hard for me to even say out loud or share, because I never thought that at that point in time that actually my granddad, who passed, would be meeting my children before me, and not just that first one, but everyone after that 2 years later. And that's really hard, because I remember people saying, when someone in your family passes and then you get pregnant, like that's the blessing, or that's them sending you a gift. And for me, that wasn't true at all. And I'll share that as we move on. But I think that's a complicated aspect, and something that was said to me that really hurt. You can tell it still hurts. But yeah, my journey's been really complicated, certainly far more complicated than anyone promised me and that I was ever prepared for. Doctors, friends, family, well-meaning neighbors, strangers on the internet, when they told me it would get better, it actually just got worse. and I wasn't prepared for that. Our journey is going to hit its 3-year anniversary in November. And in the span of that time, I've had 4 miscarriages. My first loss was a biochemical pregnancy at 5 weeks. And I really hate that term. Loss is loss to me. And that's something that I will always share on my page. But I think it's important to use that word here so that people can recognize that you are allowed to grieve a loss of any time. And I wasn't given that permission, and I'm not going to perpetuate that. It was crushing to me. And I've had later losses than that. And I will tell you that it brought my world down all the same.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think Amanda and I both have had early losses where you're not seeing the baby on the ultrasound. And just for listeners, if this is their first episode or they're like, what's a biochemical pregnancy? All that means is that the HCG just wasn't high enough. You weren't far enough along, or the HCG itself didn't get high enough to see it clinically on the ultrasound. And so that's really the only differentiator. And like, to your point, I've had biochemical pregnancies that were more devastating than a pregnancy that had gotten farther along. So that is so important, and I appreciate the advocacy there.
Absolutely. And thank you for clarifying that. And I'm just really sorry for your losses. I mean, everyone on here, and your losses as well, because it's really hard. But I think it's so important. For me, my first loss was a chemical pregnancy, and that made me feel far more isolated and so much more invalidated, because I was pregnant for 9 days. But I'm going to tell you what I did in those 9 days so that people can see what it looks like to be pregnant, even just for that short amount of time. But after my first chemical pregnancy, I had a missed miscarriage at 8 weeks, 5 days. After that, I had one spontaneous pregnancy loss at 6 weeks from a medicated IUI. And then I had my most recent loss in May at 7 weeks from a medicated IUI that I had a DNC at 8 weeks. And I can talk all about the complicatedness of being pregnant for a week, but like knowing that you have this date set and how just hard that is to move about your daily life, like you're not having this really horrible experience. Aside from my losses, I've done 8 medicated IUIs, 6 failing and 2 with the pregnancies that ended in the first trimester. I've had 2 laparoscopic surgeries since November of last year, with another on the horizon. And it just, far more complicated than just relax, go on vacation, and keep trying. Yeah. I'll tell you, I'll give you the story of my fertility journey, but just for an overview so people can hear what diagnoses have complicated my journey from the beginning and maybe find themselves in my story, is that in this order, I have been diagnosed with recurrent pregnancy loss, hypothyroidism. I had a uterine septum, albeit small, but still present, diminished ovarian reserve, secondary infertility, stage 3 endometriosis that resulted in a hydrosalpinx, which is an issue with the fallopian tube, and adenomyosis. And right now we're working on banking embryos. And in the presence of all those diseases that I just said, and then pushing for genetic testing is so much more difficult than I know that people realize that haven't walked this walk.
Yeah. So Rebecca, oh my goodness, that's a lot. So my question is, because I have no diagnosis, do you feel like getting quote unquote diagnosed with these things has helped you move forward in continuing your journey, or is it all still kind of blurry?
Yeah, I would say that for 2 years, I didn't really have an explanation. Really having the laparoscopic surgery and finding out that I had endometriosis, and then doing some research on what exactly that meant for fertility and how it actually changed the structure of my anatomy. It removed some of the mysticism that I think people assign to getting pregnant. And it helped me to understand that everything everyone had ever said to me about following a special diet, avoiding certain foods, going on vacation, like working out hard and then maybe not working out at all, which is weird because, it's all ends of the spectrum. But it gave me fuel to say, no, actually, I have a chronic disease that is complicating how my reproductive system functions. It's not anything that I'm doing wrong. It's not my mindset. It's not my positivity. It's not my faith. It's not a lack of prayer. it's a chronic disease that makes this hard for me, that requires medical care. And with everything we know in 2024, it's still not a definitive yes for me. So I do think in that way it helped me stand up to hearing those words.
Yeah, for sure.
And for that, I'm thankful.
No, I love that you said that, especially because like when people say those comments, they're like trying to be helpful, but they're not. And it's so hurtful. And then being able to say, like, no, that's not going to help me. This is why, I'm sure is so empowering too.
Yes, it definitely is.
The only other thing I wanted to add too, I think when you start going through recurrent loss, because I heard you say it in there, it's like exercise, don't exercise, eat this way, don't eat this way. When you go through recurrent loss, you can literally look at people in the face and be like, I had a miscarriage when I did a ton of exercise. I had a miscarriage when I was bed rest. I had a miscarriage. It's like, I'm telling you, it's all just crap. But I love that answer. And that's so beautiful. Like, I think you've had a really, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you have a really good care team that's listening to you, and you've learned to advocate for yourself to keep pushing for some answers.
Yes, and absolutely. But that alone has really been a journey too, going from providers and then finding a lot of information on social media and from other people sharing their journeys and hearing, I mean, even the episode that I heard from you guys about reproductive immunology and that person's journey, I was like listening. I remember distinctly listening to that podcast as I was walking around the lake near my house in September of last year, after having 7 medicated IUIs and an REI not solve my recurrent pregnancy loss, which I had thought for sure this has got to be the answer. And hearing the story and how it unfolded and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. And this sounds so familiar to my story. And that's just how it goes. I think in this area where there's still a lot to be known on recurrent pregnancy loss. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done. And unfortunately, we have to kind of figure it out ourselves sometimes, or find providers and care teams that are willing to listen and try things out. So.
Well, I appreciate you going down that route, because I found it just interesting to hear that you do have a diagnosis, but you're still having the loss. So I was really interested in when you said you were going to walk us through like the 9 days of being pregnant and what that looked like for you. I think that's what people that haven't gone through this don't understand. And that's when they make comments like, well, at least it was early. No, those were like 9 extremely vivid and emotional days for me, probably more than any other 9 days I've had. So I would love to hear that.
Absolutely. Okay, so, and this is just really the joke of my life. Our first month trying to get pregnant was, I got my birth control out in November of 2021. I got a period 3 days later, or like a bleed, and much to my surprise, I was pregnant the very next month. I mean, the date of my last period was actually the 3-day bleed the month I got my birth control out. And so I bought all the early pregnancy tests, because they say you can test 3 hours after conceiving or something. So I just was like, okay, let me buy all.
Stop, that is hilarious. I love that.
I thought you just thought about having sex and you got pregnant, right?
Right.
That's what I believed.
Yeah.
And so I spent way too much money on all of these pregnancy tests, and I had been taking them already for a week, negative after negative. And I'm a whole 2 weeks into my journey thinking, oh, this is so hard. And then much to my surprise, on December 20th, which was just 7 days after my 26th birthday, I saw a second line, and I was like, oh my gosh, that happened really fast. I hope we're ready for this. Kind of like that, wow, I hope you thought through this, and I woke my husband up, and I took a digital test just to make sure that I wasn't seeing double, because you'd be surprised how hard it can be to determine if you see a line or not,
Yes.
So
Even
for
now,
sure.
like
Yeah,
even
even
now,
now.
5 years later, like 9 pregnancies later, I'm like, is that a line?
No, I just send them
Right.
to her every time. I'm like, Kat, is this true? Like, what? Tell me.
Yeah, no, I have a bestie and we send each other, our tests with our urine dots and everything. And it's just like a special bond you share with your friend.
I love that.
But I woke my husband up and I was like, well, that was really fast. And so that was a work day. So then, 20 minutes later, I'm off on my way to work. I snapped a pic of the pregnancy test and I just like a couple times throughout the morning, I was just looking at them like, oh my gosh, like this is really positive. I can't believe this is happening to me. And then by 9 a.m., I had already called my OB to schedule an appointment, because I'm like, okay, let's go, let me get on the docket. And we got an ultrasound appointment. That would have been, I think about 9 weeks, if I remember correctly. And that would have been like mid-February, but don't check my math. But it was somewhere about that. And I was like, okay, let's go. Let me look up all the pregnancy symptoms and be ready. Well, in that week, the next day, actually, I decided to start a pregnancy journal, and I would pick a verse and write to my baby. And I told my husband, like, you write your experience week to week, and we can put it together in this journal, and it's going to be awesome. And we had a Polaroid camera he had bought me for our honeymoon. And we started with a bump picture because that's what I wanted. Even, at 4 weeks, like I found out so early that I was ready to do that. And I took the picture in front of a wall. That was my office because I had got my master's degree and I was ready for my office to be a nursery. And I see the trim behind you guys. I had put up that like cool hexagon trim that was really popular. It's still popular, but it was like all the rage at that time in 2021. I mean, putting that up almost destroyed our marriage. And so it's kind of funny. We've grown a lot. But if you want to test your marriage, do DIY. And so I had
So true.
this picture. Yeah. And it was meaningful to me because I had picked a white color when I had painted it a year prior, thinking, okay, whether it's a boy or a girl, this is going to be the perfect color. And I can roll with that. And so we saved the picture. I put it with my little note and I was ready. We surprised one of my best friends with a pregnancy announcement, which now I'm like, I won't ever surprise anyone with a pregnancy announcement because you just never, ever know what they're going through. And so the thought of even that I did that, like, just really bothers me for myself, makes me feel icky. But yeah, we were so excited and we took a video as a surprise. And I say in the video too, my friend says, wow, that was really fast. And my husband says, yeah, we're just really fertile. And having that just frozen moment in time of two people so incredibly naive to what was to come is like, I'm thankful to have it because I can see it full circle, but it just makes me so sad for that person who just had no idea. And then I went to work. So we're about 7 days into my pregnancy. I'm feeling nauseated. I am just can't believe I'm walking out to my car with like a baby inside of me. But then I'm talking to somebody, one of my friends, and they tell me about how you can buy another pregnancy test and see if the line's getting darker. And that can tell you, yeah, and I see your faces because I know
I just resonate with your story so much. It's wild, like the pregnancy journey and writing to your baby and the bump pick. And I'll let you continue through, but I'm sure that how you handled the fourth pregnancy is very different than this first one. And it was for me. But yeah, that gives me chills. Now you have to go take another pregnancy test.
Exactly, because I hear that and I want to see it's getting darker. So I go to the store and all they had was the early result, like most expensive test. So I'm thinking, oh, my line is going to be so dark because this is an early test and I'm a week after my period. So this is going to be really good. Well, I go home and I pee on the stick, and very much to my surprise, the line is barely there anymore. And I'm like, this is weird. What does this mean? And so immediately I go to Google. And this is the first time in my journey that I go down page 27 on Google. trying to find one story of hope. You know, maybe I just drank a lot of water that day, even though I know I drank almost no water that day. Or maybe, you know, just trying to rationalize and just really not wanting to accept that this might be a really bad sign. But I actually didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell my husband because I didn't want to give it words because I was afraid like maybe it would make it true. And so I held it in that night. And then without like being too graphic, I went to sleep that night. And when I woke up in the morning, I just felt like I had peed myself. Like it was just very wet. And when I got out of bed, it was so abundantly clear to me that there was no way that a pregnancy could have continued or would have survived. And so I got up, and of course, this happened on a work day. I got up, I took a shower, and I went to work because I didn't know any better. You know, no one had prepared me. When I called to make that appointment, the only thing that was said was, congratulations, see you in February. And so I cleaned myself up in the shower. You know, I throw my pajama pants away, and I called my doctor's office on the way, or once I got to work. And I was just like, I need to cancel my appointment. I know that I had a loss. And they're like, okay, well, we need you to get your blood drawn. And so we'll put orders in and you go get your blood drawn. And I didn't know that there was any care after a pregnancy loss. But that was the first time my experience with trending down in HCG. When just a couple of days before, you're so desperately wanting to see the levels increase, the line get dark. And now you're in this weird spot where you're like so desperately craving you before pregnancy so you can get back in there and try again. And that's what I felt. But I never went back to that version of myself again. And it took me a long time trying to fight to get back to that version. And then finally accepting that this is actually a new me. And part of my healing was learning that. But, you know, my first HCG was 15, which a week after my period was low. And they were like, okay, go get a draw. Just, I can't remember if it was like 5 days later or a week later. Let's just see that it's gone down to 0. And it was 0. And I got a period just a day later after that HCG went to 0. And then we were off. And I actually didn't get a phone call. When I'm talking about this verbal communication, I got an instant message on my electronic health portal from my doctor's assistant saying this was probably a biochemical pregnancy. There's nothing else that you need to do. Maybe take a home test in a week and let us know if it's not negative. And that was it. And that like perpetuated. Like maybe I shouldn't be grieving because this isn't even worth a phone call. And that to me was like, I hear a lot the word like gaslighting, and I feel like that resonates so much with my fertility journey because I'm like feeling the most pain of my entire life, but interacting with people that are acting like it's not a big deal. I mean, yeah.
You're bringing so much up. I think you're probably bringing so much up for Amanda too. And I don't know what because we both just had losses this year and both were biochemical pregnancies. And I don't know how Amanda's was. But I mean, I even shared mine on the Instagram. I got an email and they didn't even say, they just said your HCG is 11, lower than it should be. If you want to come back in a couple of days, that'd be great. And I'm just like, okay, well, like I'm like supposed to be 5 weeks pregnant, like it's not 11. And so you just verbalize things really well, Rebecca. And I mean, I'm taking a lot from it. I don't know what your experience was, Amanda, but that's so true. Just not getting the validation, even from your doctor that says it is positive, you are pregnant, but it's not where it's supposed to be. So we'll see you next time you get pregnant.
I think my doctor, just because like she knows us so well because it's like our fertility clinic and like we've gone through like our embryos with her and everything, that she was like more sad for us. But like in the past when I've had a loss and stuff, it was like, through like my chart, and they didn't like follow up with a call or anything, or like, here's what you do next, or expect this. I think that was the biggest thing, is I had no idea what was coming or what to expect of how much like blood I was going to, not to be gross, but like how much blood was going to be there, or like actually passing the baby. And like, there was nothing that was told to me of what is to come. And that was like so shocking, I think.
Absolutely. And I resonate. I mean, and maybe not in this first, but just in different areas, certainly I've experienced the gambit of providers and their reactions. And I'm just like, my hearts go out to you guys because it is so hard. And I found even just being in this Instagram space of going through losses, like you're still walking through this as you walk alongside other people. And it can be so tender sometimes in a beautifully connected way, but also in a heartbreaking way, because when somebody says something or goes through it, you're like, oh my God, I remember the second that happened, and you're just like brought to tears because you just know, and it's really hard. So I'm really sorry.
And we are so sorry for your losses as well. And I think even just the simplest things of going to page 27 on your Google, I can remember sitting there and doing it. It was such a dark time because you had nowhere to go. You're on these Reddit boards or these baby center boards. And I think something that you do really well on your Instagram and your account is, and you know, Amanda, myself, and you have all had multiple miscarriages. And so something that you do is, it's not as easy for us when you're reading this stuff of, oh, I got pregnant the next month and I have my 2.5-year-old. Oh, well, you know, all those boards are just this like story of like, hope, don't worry, you'll be fine. But it's not the case for a lot of people. And I think you do a really good job sharing through your experience and just saying like, you know, like we're the 1% here. Like this is reoccurrent loss, and it is a little bit different to process emotionally and socially.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of the hope that you read, and certainly after my first pregnancy loss, that's what I was told. I was told, see you when you're pregnant again, because I had made an appointment to talk about the first loss, to see, you know, what can I change? And they're like, oh, it's really common. It's probably a fluke. You're so young. Like you only just started trying, you know, see you when you're pregnant next time. That was said to me. That means nothing to someone that has recurrent pregnancy loss, because getting pregnant multiple times in a row and that resulting in loss is so incredibly traumatic and painful. And to have that said to you like it's some kind of consolation prize is ridiculous. It is. But I also know I didn't know that. And if I hadn't gone through this, I myself would have probably perpetuated that narrative. If my second pregnancy I couldn't have related in this way. So, you know, I also like to extend grace kind of when we talk about these things and people's reactions, because I wouldn't want anyone to go through this. But what I think people can do that want to support others who have recurrent loss is listen to understand and hear our stories and understand why that hope that you tried to give me after my first pregnancy loss was the thing that broke me when my second pregnancy loss came to fruition, because everything that was promised to me did not come true. And in fact, over and over again, it did not come true. And so when you say hope, I saw something early in my journey that was like, hope used to be a friend and now it's a foe. And I think, my gosh, I wish I could credit who said that or where I even read it, but yeah, it's really hard. And so after my first pregnancy loss, I didn't tell anyone, but we chose a name, and we chose the name Noah. And I was going to a therapist already at the time because I had baseline generalized anxiety, which is like the perfect prerequisite mental health challenge to have when you are going to get diagnosed with recurrent pregnancy loss. Because I'm like, oh my God, all of this anxiety that they're telling me isn't like, I don't need to be anxious about, suddenly has been validated by all of my trauma.
Yeah.
So that's something that I battle with, you know, at a baseline. But my therapist was like, why don't you name your baby? That can help you to connect with the pregnancy. And I just remember like thinking, okay, I'll try that. And maybe that felt like a little bit strange to me at first, but I love that. I love that we did that because it gave me a connection to that baby and the love that I had. But I remember going on like name boards, you know, and of course we had already had a list, like one day into the pregnancy of if it was a boy or a girl, what we were going to
100%.
Yes. But then being in the weird spot where I want to pick a name that could work maybe for both genders, because I don't know what gender my baby was. but also maybe like a second favorite or a third favorite name, because I knew that that name wasn't going to be said. And so I didn't want to use a name that I wanted to use.
You're
And
spot
nobody
on.
talks about that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I struggle with that all the time because I would have 8 names. And we also named our first. I know Amanda named her first. And like, I will say we never named a baby after our first. And it sounds like you may have, but it was exactly for that reason of like, God, you're not going to be, people are not going to be saying it.
100%.
Right.
This last
And-
one I actually had the name for, and my whole family even said the name all the time, but I still want the name for this like next transfer. And so now we're just saying the name 2.0. So, I mean, you can still use the name, just say.
You absolutely can. And I think that's really important permission to give people that are listening, is that this journey and what you decide to do for your pregnancy is totally yours to decide. And it's also a decision that can change and grow with time. If I want to use the name Noah in the future, I'm going to use it. And I don't really care what anybody has to say about it. But it took me a while to get there. And I think whenever like you are thinking of having a baby and maybe you have a list of 8 names, nobody ever assumes you're going to spend those 7 other names naming your pregnancies that ended, or, you know, your embryos that you lost. I mean, it's kind of a sad reality. I certainly never planned on having 4 children at all, much less being pregnant 4 times in my entire life. And so that's a hard part of recurrent pregnancy loss, but something that I did in my first pregnancy that allowed me to, you know, connect. We didn't tell anyone, just my husband. And then eventually my parents, I told, because I was so sad and they were like wanting me to go out and paint pottery. And I had to explain why I couldn't get off the couch and like just couldn't function as a human being. And you know, they were all very understanding. And I'm thankful for that. But it didn't allow me to seek grief treatment or connection with others. But I did become a silent observer of social media accounts that talked about having a miscarriage. And so so my pregnancy was over, and I had a period the next day. My HCG was 0. And so then we continued on, as they say you should. And then came the ovulation test strips and tracking and timed intercourse amid grief after you've had a miscarriage. Okay, nothing is sexy about that. Okay. Because like my husband and I are already grieving in different ways, struggling with how do we connect again? When to me, it was my body, it was a huge loss. To him, it was a very abstract thing that didn't take him as long to grieve. And me trying to understand and give him grace for that, for us to be different in our grief and both to be okay. And then try to have sex on like, you know, February 2nd.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. My husband and I just recorded an episode and we talked about all of this of like, I would put the little hearts on the calendar, and ultimately I had to stop doing it. And I just had to deal with it internally myself because I was trying to create that intimacy. So I would like really be like, oh, today, you know, I'm really into you, but knowing in the back of my head that like, okay, I'm ovulating.
Right. Yeah.
Really
yeah. No, you know, I did the same thing.
Yeah. I totally get that.
And I remember like maybe we got into a fight or a disagreement, largely fueled by grief, you know, because when you're upset, it's like, oh my gosh, you didn't throw away the rotting strawberries. Like, I can't believe I'm married to you. And it's like, no, that's kind of ridiculous, but you're just really sad. And then thinking, but I don't care how mad I am at you. We're having sex tonight. Because skipping this date is worse to me than like getting it together for however long it's going to take, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So true.
I know. Okay, but just to like continue on, in my second pregnancy, so we tried to conceive for about 3 months. That's how long it took to get pregnant the second time, which I was like, oh, good. You know, I can get pregnant again, because that's a fear you have after a miscarriage. It's like maybe the fluke was actually getting pregnant and being scared of infertility and what that would look like. But we did get pregnant naturally. And I just remember like getting so close to being 9 days pregnant and being so scared of passing that anniversary and being so scared to wake up that next morning, because for me, going to sleep was a trigger. And when you're told to like rest and get good sleep so that your pregnancy is healthy, but actually that sleep was something that reminds you of your loss, is like so complicated. But we passed that 9 days and we passed 7 weeks. And when we got to 7.5 weeks, we did a private ultrasound where we saw a heartbeat for the first time. And I'm like, okay, so my second pregnancy actually progressed further than the first. I saw a heartbeat. And when you start to look at the statistics of after a heartbeat, your likelihood of another loss. And when you look at the statistics of the likelihood that your next pregnancy will progress after having one miscarriage, neither of those prepare someone who's about to face recurrent pregnancy loss. You're actually about to feel the most alone, I think, than you've maybe ever felt in your entire life. Because lightning has now struck twice, when for most other people around you, that was never true for them. And so we saw the heartbeat, and I wanted to wait to announce when we saw the heartbeat, because I was like, okay, this is going to be the pregnancy that works. You know, I'm 26. I was incredibly healthy at the time, in the best shape of my life. Why wouldn't this work out for us? So then we went back to my parents. We told them, we told my in-laws, and we got a little bear with the heartbeat recorded at the private ultrasound and brought the bear to them. And we put it in a stuffed lamb. Like my husband wanted a bear, but I really wanted a stuffed lamb because when I was growing up, I had a stuffed lamb and I thought this was so sweet, like my baby and perpetuating this. Let me tell you where that lamb is now. It's in my guest closet. And it took me so long to even pull it out of the box to be able to look at it again. And that was over 2 years ago, because that was so painful to me to hear a heartbeat and then to go back a week later after telling everyone, only to not see a wiggly baby on the ultrasound, but see something that wasn't moving, was so traumatic. And I remember, you know, I had no signs or symptoms. It was a miscarriage, completely silent, which is like such a mind game, because now you trust nothing, right? I mean, before I feel like I had a little bit of a heads up, even though it was less than a day. And I get into the ultrasound room and I drink all this water and I'm feeling really sick. I had morning sickness that morning. I threw up. And the ultrasound tech was like, hi, I'm so happy to be back at work. This is my first day back from maternity leave. And I'm like, oh, yay, this will be so fun. And she starts to do the exam on the belly, which would have been my second one on the belly. And she's like moving it around and there's no sound. And I can't see anything, but my husband can see, and bless his heart. It's just the innocence on his face, because all I can see is my husband's face. And then when nothing is happening, and then she tells me, you know, I need you to go empty your bladder. And I'm like, that's so weird, because they told me to come with a full bladder. And now I know emptying the bladder was so that she could do the transvaginal ultrasound to confirm and actually take pictures that there was no heartbeat, so that we could progress kind of with, you know, what we're going to do next. And just having that realization in my mind and thinking we were going to go meet my new OB and this was going to be so fun, to then meeting the radiologist, you know, a doctor that doesn't typically talk to you at your first trimester ultrasound, and him just telling me, you know, you're measuring to the day of what we would expect, 8 weeks, 5 days, and your baby's heartbeat probably stopped within hours of getting here. And the ultrasound tech at first being encouraging, that she was asking me about symptoms and being encouraging before she did the imaging exam, that it was a good thing that I had thrown up. This is a good thing I'm having strong symptoms. And now it's like the symptom thing, being questioned about that is a trigger for me, because that didn't mean anything for me. And it continues to not mean anything to me.
Spot on. And again, listeners, like a miscarriage, your body, to your point, you continue to have symptoms. You don't have bleeding, or I mean, if you're having bleeding, it's completely unrelated to the miscarriage, and you're typically finding out in a scan. And I can relate, I can just relate so much. I remember my husband, the first thing out of his mouth was, but she's been so sick. What do you mean? And yeah, it's so, I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry too. I mean, I can talk to women that have had this experience, and I have, and we're just in tears, because it's like, no matter, it's just being in that room and hearing that silence is just the loudest silence of my entire life. And then the worst part for me was then going to my OB appointment still, going from the imaging center and sitting in the waiting room with my husband, with visibly pregnant women, feeling like I'm the only one in the world that is here with a death sentence. And instead of planning for life, I'm going to have to talk to them about what to do with this. And that's one of the only things I didn't plan for when I got pregnant. And then you find yourself having to make a decision on how do you proceed with very little information and very little time. I mean, you can take your time if you have that. I had a spontaneous loss also later on, which I didn't really, I mean, it just happened. But it's just really difficult to be in that position and feel so unprepared. But I had decided to proceed with a D&C because I felt like I just wanted this to be over and I didn't feel like I could handle it at home. And so my OB was able to get me in the very next day to have a D&C. And I took that surgery day off from work, and I took the next day off to recover from surgery. And then I went back and I never told a soul. And
Isolating you have had.
it's so isolating. And it's like when you have planned surgery and everyone's there to take care of you, and then you have this horribly traumatic experience, and then you just go back to your regular life. And because I had a chemical pregnancy the first time, I didn't know about trending down your HCG for like a month or 6 weeks. And your body kind of, because like your breasts are swollen and you're bloated and your body has to kind of take care of itself and recover. So then you're like in this trying to conceive mode of get pregnant. And then you have this forced break, which is really hard, where then you're like in this weirdly invisible postpartum period of time, which I use that word and I have posts with that word in it because you don't just have a period and return to normal. Your body is dropping hormones down and there's not enough awareness about that. And just as you've recovered that 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, I mean, it just depends where you are and when your loss is, right? But for me, where that 4-week recovery period put me when I was back to trying to conceive? It put me right back into this area where everybody else that got pregnant at the same time as me was announcing and showing. And I have just freshly recovered from the secret postpartum experience and then kind of expected to like engage and be happy and excited for people that were on a journey that I was so envious of and that I didn't get to have. And what I think it comes down to though on reflection is that their journey got to be seen and my journey didn't get to be seen because I was told to, whether it was a learned behavior or perpetuated by my experience, it was just like, keep it under wraps, recover and just get over it and try again. And I remember being told like, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe you needed a break. Like, that's so offensive. Like, I don't need a break.
Yep.
That doesn't help. And so, and I'll kind of move forward a little bit faster just to take you through. From that miscarriage to June, I went to recurrent pregnancy loss. Like, I got the workup at a fertility doctor. I advocated for myself to get seen after 2 miscarriages, which, like some people say 3 losses, some people say 2. Some people like include the biochemical, sometimes they don't, but I was like, I just pushed for it. I wanted to go, and that's what we did. That was the right decision for me. But also I know that access and finances and all of those things are barriers that really complicate the recurrent pregnancy loss journey that I also don't think get acknowledged enough. But we found ourselves at the clinic. We did the workup, and 50% of the time they don't find anything with the way the workups are now. And for me, that kind of was the case. I found a little bit of hypothyroidism, but it wasn't anything that couldn't be corrected. And so they fixed that within a month. And then I had like a tiny septum, but it was like, do we do anything about it? Do we not? So we decided not to. And then I went home and they gave me some progesterone for like that second half of your cycle while we were trying to conceive. And we tried to conceive from, you know, July to December. And much to my surprise, nothing happened. We never got pregnant again. And so we went back in January and my doctor was like, okay, we can try some medications and we can do IUIs. And I was like, oh, great. You know, IUI, like this is going to be the solution. Like we're going to ovulate and we'll watch it. I wasn't prepared for how complicated IUI can be. Like I thought it was a pretty straightforward process. And when I had seen my friends go through it, their journey was pretty straight. My journey has not been straight at all, basically ever. And my first IUI, I ovulated like on cycle day 7. We did the IUI because it was like the medicine just worked really fast and it was kind of a weird thing. And then we switched medications after I got a cyst my second cycle that ended up having to get canceled and I had to go on birth control. And I just remember getting that really bad news and then having to go back to work after that and pretending like I cared about anything else because all I wanted to do was get pregnant. And then I didn't know that with fertility treatments that they can get canceled and there can be complicating factors that don't mean you get a baby in 4 weeks from when you started. And I just didn't know that. But then my third pregnancy was the result of our third IUI. But when we got the results, my progesterone was low. My HCG was a little lower than what they would have expected. I went in for an ultrasound and the sac was measuring 5 days behind, which was like kind of right on the cusp. They wanted me to wait 5 days, but during that time I just started bleeding more and more. And I knew that I had passed the pregnancy the day before from what I could see. And then after I passed it, the bleeding stopped. So that's also something different about passing a pregnancy, like versus a period. It's kind of like your body's revving up, ramping up to get rid of or to heal itself or whatever rhetoric makes you feel the most comfortable. I think it's important to use that to explain your personal experience, but that was mine. And then I kind of knew it was over and they confirmed it. But I think that marks a really important part of my recurrent pregnancy loss journey was like this fertility treatment isn't the answer either. Like I thought it was going to save me and it didn't save me. And what it's hard when you have RPL because like every time you have a pregnancy, it's so different and there's so many factors. It's hard to really say what causes what. And nobody can really tell you, and who you ask is like a different answer. And but that was like a really big pivotal change in my life where fertility treatments maybe weren't going to be the end all be all like I thought they were. And then I was here with a third pregnancy loss, which was really hard because I had known people that had 2 in a row, but then I became the only person I knew that had 3 in a row. And those hopeful promises when people said like, oh, next time is going to be it, just wasn't true at all for me. It was actually just getting worse and just getting harder. But yet I had more advice coming from people that had never walked this journey. And I'm just like, no offense, but there's nothing you're going to search on Google that's going to solve my problem right now. And there's also nothing that you're going to discern as the miracle cure from the little piece of my story I'm giving to you at a 30-minute coffee meetup.
Yep. Yep. So spot on.
Yeah. I think in this part of my journey, it like made me just angry and upset and bitter, but all very valid feelings. And walking through this with some other friends that had their own unique journeys, getting pregnant the same cycle that I did and watching those pregnancies progress. Not that you ever want something bad to happen to anyone, but it was such a hard, mentally challenging time for me to try and be the friend that I wanted to be to my friends while also like going through something really hard and triggering. But after kind of hitting my rock bottom and really struggling with like not being able to get out of bed and going to sleep as soon as I got home and using all the energy I could muster to be all the things I needed to be for people from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And just, I had to crash in my bed. And finally, I found a different counselor that had experience with recurrent pregnancy loss just by like doing an internet search of the areas around me. And I had been following the miscarriage doula for a while. And that's something that I share on my page because their recurrent pregnancy loss specific support group was something that I joined a little bit after my third loss. And it was the first time in my entire life where I was connected with other women that were sharing their RPL stories that were validating me. And it was after so many people telling me you're not alone when they in fact are nowhere near relating to your position,
Yeah.
and like actually coming at you from their own position of privilege to tell you like advice is kind of uncomfortable for me. But I was in this room of women that are like talking about how it impacts relationships and how the treatments go. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was so freeing to me. And so that's a resource that I share on my page. And Recurrent Pregnancy Loss Association, I haven't engaged with their group, but they have a specific one. And that's part of my mission, is just bringing to light that recurrent pregnancy loss is its special journey and it's different. And some of those statements and comfort resources can be kind of complicated when you have a fourth pregnancy loss and you're getting the same resource over and over again. Like there's nothing fresh to fit your unique situation. But I would say after that support group, it was just pivotal. But as the story goes, it gets worse.
I was gonna say, I found the miscarriage doula too, and that is one of the reasons, like on our posts, I always hashtag like miscarriage support or RPL, because that's all I was doing when I was going through it. I was just trying to find hashtags, like, because people until late, like until just recently, have started sharing this type of journey. I know you mentioned you hadn't shared in the beginning, and the miscarriage doula, I think, just posted this week. They're doing another support group. Did you see that? Like, it's upcoming. Yeah. And even me, like, I've never been a part of a support group, and I'm 5 years in my journey. I've been able to have my daughter, but now I'm going through it again. And I'm like, wow, that's something that I would love to do. So I love that you dropped their name, and it's something that we can add in our show notes too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just when you become the 1% and you're in a room full of 100 people and you're the only one, well, that one other person might be in another room 3 countries over or 5 states over. We have to expand our horizon to find each other. And for me, when I found other people, and even just engaging in messages on my platform with people, like I get messages saying, thank you for, sharing or helping me. But those people help me so much because I don't think I'm like, I know everything, or I'm just like, I've figured it all out. I'm just a person who has recurrent pregnancy loss, who's still in the thick of trying to conceive, here to say, this is my story. And this is how recurrent pregnancy loss has affected me. And when they share their stories with me and their comments and their messages, it like heals a part in me that I just can't even give enough words to, like to express how meaningful it is.
Absolutely. I know I found you and I was like, recurrent pregnancy loss, amazing. Not amazing, but you know what I mean? I'm like, she'll get me. She gets it. And it's just so difficult. And so I interrupted you with the miscarriage doula, but you said it gets worse.
Yeah, it does get worse. And I know we're getting close on time, so it's
that's okay. Keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. And so I got the support through the support group. I'm gonna back up for just a second with the RPL. After my second miscarriage, I joined a local church group for miscarriage and infant loss. And the people that ran that was 2 people, and they were amazing. And they had stories similar, I would say, in some ways, but always different. But I was the only person that showed up for that support group for the entire time it was offered. And while I'm so grateful for the people that put it on, it was really hard for me because mentally I was like, maybe I'm looking around like, am I really the only one going through this right now? Because that's what it felt like.
Wow.
And, yeah. And so that was hard, but it was still really helpful and my first time engaging. But then I found the miscarriage doula, and the recurrent loss group just was so healing to my heart. And so now kind of moving on, once I had recovered from my third miscarriage and my HCG was down, it took about a month. That's pretty usual for my recovery. We jumped back into medicated IUI. Like, okay, we had got pregnant, so maybe it's just like a fluke and like next time will be the time. Well, then we did 4 more cycles and I was completely unprepared for IUI to not work again because I thought I would get pregnant. And when I didn't get pregnant, it was really hard. And it became really frustrating to me because I didn't know where to turn, and I was kind of out of answers. So when that, probably about like August, whenever the like third to last IUI didn't work out, I went back to the internet and I started scouring for answers because I think in this journey, like at first I was accepting that maybe it was a fluke and there weren't any answers. And then after my second loss, I like dove way deep into research I could get my hands on to read what the problem was. Then I tried all these treatments and then I got so exhausted. I stopped searching because I'm like, what in the world? People are getting pregnant on accident. It's got to be okay for me too, right? At some point, it can't require like a PhD to figure out how to beat a fluke, right? And it's like, I bought a couple lottery tickets in my life and never won them. So I'm not really sure that it's like my inherently good ability to achieve the 1%,
Right.
But then after after about September, I just started kind of going into looking more into recurrent pregnancy loss and what's out there. And my stepmom at the time, which I love her so much, and she's been so dear to me on this journey, but she sent me a podcast. It was by Jordan Dooley, and Jordan was talking about her experience with recurrent loss and reproductive immunology. And I was so sick of people sending me random advice that I actually didn't even listen to that podcast for 3 weeks after my stepmom. I left her on red. Okay. I was like, I can't even listen to that.
I love Jordan. And same thing, Courtney Dunker, or I think that's her last name. I just had to, you just like shut it down sometimes because you're like, I can't process and take anymore. I've already done so much, but those are really good resources too.
Yeah, they are. And Jordan talks about in that podcast it being the right time to hear things. And for me, I had to kind of wait till it was the right time for me to hear it. And so I listened to that podcast. And again, I was going around the lake because this is the same day that I found your podcast episode 2, because then I started searching recurrent or reproductive immunology. And I was just floored by how similar the journey sounded. And I thought I had explored all avenues, because that's what had been told to me. And I didn't know that this existed. And so I immediately went and like looked up the providers that she had suggested in the podcast. And I just started submitting like paperwork or, saying, hey, I want to be evaluated to be a patient or whatever. And at that same time, I started looking into endometriosis because I had always had painful periods as an adolescent, but then I got on birth control at 18 and I rode that wave until I was ready to conceive. So I really didn't know what my period was. And now I went to my OB, who was my third OB on this journey. And if I was going to write a book, there would be a whole chapter on him, and his superhero character would be an angel, because I just would get emotional because even walking through my last loss with him, he just will never know, I think, the impact that he had on me. But I found this new OB, and it was because my best friend had recommended him to me. And I will say, if you share a therapist and an OB with your best friend, like that's a good place to start with recommendations. And he was like, maybe if you think you have endometriosis, let's explore it. It's a surgery to make sure to diagnose it. But if you want to do that, I'll do it for you. And he just believes.
That's the best doctor that just believes in you and listens to you. And you can bring him the craziest thing in the world. And they're like, well, do you think you have questions? Let's do it. Let's figure it out.
Willing to try.
Yeah, exactly. And he still to this day, he brings in his laptop and he will search articles. He will read articles that you sent him. Yes. I sent him podcasts on reproductive immunology and recurrent loss. He listened to them. And not only did he listen to them, he remembered that I'm the one that suggested them and talked to me about it at my next appointment, about how it resonated with him and his practice. And that was huge to me after feeling like a patient that had stuff being done to her and not done with her. And so, yeah, he was amazing, but he actually, they had an opening. So I had my laparoscopic surgery the day after Thanksgiving, which was really fast because, you know, some people have to wait a really long time. And I was just really like lucky. I mean, in the right place at the right time, which feels like such a painfully dumb statement to say that people have said to me in my recurrent loss journey. That worked out. And we had the surgery, and I remember kind of getting to the second recovery area where you're like a little bit more with it, and seeing my husband sitting in the chair and him just looking at me, and he said, "Babe, the doctor said it's a mess in there." And and I was like post anesthesia, a lot of drugs on board for pain, and I will never forget the look on his face and the feeling that I had hearing those words, like, "Oh my God, you mean to tell me that something is actually wrong with me?"
Mm-hmm.
And my doctor comes in a little while later to kind of go over his findings. And he's like, "Your fallopian tubes are messed up." And he's like, "The one of them is like, I would be shocked if it was even open. It is all squished together, grown together, and there's endometriosis all inside your tubes. There was an endometrioma on one of my ovaries, and there was endometriosis around my ovaries, not completely, but there was some on there. And there was endo all in my my uterus, and then my cervix, behind my bladder, which I had always had kind of like urinary tract symptoms with my period, and well, I have endo all on the posterior part or the back side of my uterus. And then my bowels had evidence that there had been endometriosis at a time, and it was all stuck together. I remember reading part of my bowel was like adhered to my pelvis. And then I'm thinking, oh, all that constipation that I've had through all of my 20s, like maybe isn't my fiber. Maybe I was just routed differently. I had been rerouted.
Oh my gosh. And like,
Is
girl, endometriosis. I mean, you're the one that had to ask for it. It's
yeah,
crazy.
exactly. Yeah. And then and they had seen some adenomyosis, like spots within my uterus, which I still like don't know really anything about it. And I certainly don't feel like I know enough to share on that, just knowing that's how they saw it for me. But yeah, so he got rid of the endometriosis as much as he could, but now I am dealing with tubal factor infertility. I had to get my tubes checked for opening. And then the diminished ovarian reserve that I got diagnosed with at 26 years old. And I was told this was just like, I don't know what happened. Maybe it was your environment, maybe something, you know, bad luck. If I had $1 for every time I was told that. Well, it made a lot more sense that I had this inflammatory process and disease growing on my ovaries for who knows how long. And you look into it, it makes sense. And so that's why it kind of drives me crazy when people are like going to bad luck first instead of like medicine second. Like, actually, no luck, no vitamin in the world, no hope, no faith, no prayer was gonna be the solution for my chronic disease. I mean, and maybe I think that in itself might have been the fluke.
And so, and so when were you diagnosed with all of this?
November of last year. So it's still pretty fresh. So after that laparoscopic surgery, my doctor was like, you know, you might want to seriously consider IVF. And we had considered IVF in the past for PGT testing because maybe that helps with recurrent loss. But then it's like you're young, so they tell you you probably don't have genetic issues. But then when you have recurrent pregnancy loss, it's like, what's more important, the age or the RPL? Because my age no longer comforts me, but it also kind of invalidates me. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know what to believe. And so we ultimately, with the tubal disease, decided IVF was going to be our best route because you never know when the other tube is going to close up. And when you start to have stimulation medications, it can make the endo worse because of the estrogen presence. At least that's what they told me. So we packed up all of our stuff and we moved to a different state for 6 weeks to do IVF.
Oh my God.
And what I think is important for people to know that I wanted to share on here, at least for like our listeners in America, because on my page, I have people from all over the world. Mm-hmm. And infertility is an ADA protected disability, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so I was able to use my Family Medical Leave Act, but also pursue an accommodation so that I could pursue my treatment and work could work with me, you know, whether it be like some days I could be excused from meetings because of treatment, or, you know, they would provide coverage for me when I needed it so that like the job could continue, but I didn't have to worry about finding that coverage. And it's a benefit that I don't think enough people know about. And it's a right that we can use, because when you're talking about all that I've just told you, and I know that you guys have likely experienced, is like you're still working in the background, you're still paying your bills, you're still being a friend and a family member and trying to achieve your goals. And it's just one resource that was essential to me and my husband as we pursued treatment for our disability. And so we did that. But like I said, the journey gets worse and nothing is straightforward for me. So I went for my baseline ultrasound after packing up our 2 dogs and my husband and driving, you know, multiple hours to a different state for treatment, to find out that I had an estrogen producing cyst. Which if you're trying to do IVF, I'm going to tell you that is not what you want to hear at your baseline.
Oh, no.
Because for me, that meant, okay, I remember the nurse saying, okay, well, you can come back next month. And I'm like, no, we already paid for 4 weeks, well, 2 weeks at the time, for an Airbnb. So no, I can't really do that. And so we tried some treatments to get the cyst to go away in 2 weeks. And then I went back and, well, I still had a cyst, but I never found out if it was like a new cyst on my other ovary or if it was the same one that had grown. But either way, I still had a cyst. And so I went for the next day to get an aspiration procedure. I got some light anesthesia. My husband took me home that day to recover and rest, to start stims that night. Well, I passed out on the toilet from my anesthesia in front of my poor husband and threw up a peanut butter sandwich on him. So sometimes trying to conceive is a sexy night of steak and wine dinner, and sometimes it's vomiting on your husband after you've passed out, bearing all on a toilet.
It's so true. It's so true.
It really is.
Yeah. But we did that cycle, and well, after slow progression and nothing, and when you want to do PGT testing, finding out that you only have one embryo is devastating, because that is a hard decision to make. Just moving from a day 3 embryo to a day 5, the loss of that, the risk is 50% at the high end. And so knowing after we had invested $15,000 to make a 50-50 risk on someone who is now had a 1% outcome is impossible, it feels like, to make. So we decided to freeze at day 3. And then you get the, oh, it only takes one time comment. And you're like,
Oh, yeah.
You don't understand. You don't understand that this is a devastating outcome for me. And that's very valid that I feel devastated by this outcome. And so we froze our embryo and it remains there. I came home to have my right tube removed, because when you have a hydrosalpinx and you do an embryo transfer, well, there's actually evidence that that's not a good thing to have. And so I had my second laparoscopic surgery in 3 months to get my tube removed, which was hard. And then we started the process of kind of priming with some different medications to hopefully have a better IVF outcome. And in the meantime, I decided to do one more IUI just for the heck of it. You know, I had a month that I was like, my reproductive immunologist was like, okay, you can try to conceive if you want to this month. And so we did. We tried to do an IUI, and let me tell you about the shock of my life. I thought I would never get shocked again being pregnant, but I saw those 2 lines, and, you know, I was testing out my trigger shot, which is like, okay, I don't care if they think it's bad. You know what? I've been through so much trauma. I'm going to test that trigger shot out, and I really don't care what you think about it. I know the risks. And I saw that line get darker, and I'm just like, oh my God, because it never went to 0 on the pregnancy test. So I was like, is this real? Is it not? I went and got my labs drawn. My progesterone was beautiful, more beautiful than ever. My HCG was beautiful. It doubled beautifully. I was starting to get weekly ultrasounds at 4 weeks and some days. I mean, it was so early, you could almost barely see anything. And things were progressing well. And I thought, this is my miracle pregnancy that people talk about, getting pregnant right before you start IVF. Like, this is it. Okay, finally. I announced to my parents on Mother's Day at Mother's Day brunch with our little ultrasound picture. But just like a time before, when I go back to my ultrasound, things aren't looking right. I'm getting to that 6-week mark, and we know it's an IUI. So it's like, I know what my timing is. That can't really be used. And there's no heartbeat. And so they're like, okay, let's give it a few more days and let's see if a heartbeat develops. And no heartbeat comes. And then I have to go to 7 weeks and 3 days, and we do our final check. And we're like, okay, the baby hasn't grown really. And now the yolk sac is like really big, and that's not a good sign when it takes up so much of the gestational sac. And so we're like, okay, let's schedule. And I really wanted a DNC so I could do genetic testing. Although and now I'm aware, like, you can maybe do that at home when you have your spontaneous losses or however you want to manage it. But that was important to us. And so I did that. And I will never forget. And I'm going to tell you that I use Rpl Mom very specifically because part of my mission is reclaiming that motherhood story. Because I can't tell you how horrible it is to tell people that you're pregnant and they say, oh, you're having a baby, how exciting, and start planning with you, only for a few days later for you to tell them that you had a miscarriage. And it's like they had some kind of like Men in Black amnesia. And they're like, oh, you weren't really that pregnant, or, at least it was early. And you're like, what the heck? How is this to you a baby where I'm planning my whole life around them? And now you're like, oh, it's no big deal. It's such a mind game, I think. And so, and then it's like, maybe you're not a mother. And I have one post about this, being uninvited from the motherhood party. It's like recurrent loss is getting your invitation in the mail and then having it rescinded multiple times over and over again. But what people don't see is that actually I mothered each of my pregnancies in the way that I decided to honor them, that I had to deal with what to do with my body afterwards, and how I continue to remember them and how their presence changed my entire life. And so I use that mom term very specifically in my handle. But in that DNC, in the pre-op, I got a piece of paper from the hospital and the nurse brought it in, and this nurse was so sweet and very kind, but I had to like sign something for this particular hospital if I wanted the remains to come with me, or if I wanted them to be like in a group burial situation, because this facility does that for miscarriages. And I decided to do the group burial because that was just for me. That's what felt most comfortable. But one, I didn't know they were going to ask me that. So I was really caught off guard. And two, on the signature line, I had to sign legally what I wanted. And it said mother under the signature line. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's the first time in almost 3 years that I've ever signed anything that indicated me as a mother of anything. And I was like, oh my God.
I know.
That is like, that facility, that is incredible. That one person that thought to do that.
Yeah, it was so meaningful to me. And I think it helped with my grief and being validated and feeling like, you know what, this experience is really hard and it does change you and gives you permission to seek those support services. Because if you don't ever think this is a big deal, or you're told it's not a big deal, you're not going to reach out. And I didn't reach out because I felt silly. But as I move on, I was just so thankful for that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life, feeling so validated in that. But with that baby, I found out, a few weeks later that it was a genetic loss. And it's the first time I really had a concrete answer for my miscarriage. And it was a baby boy with a trisomy 16. And I opened the message about those results and it wasn't labeled. So I wasn't expecting to read those. And, I told you I get up early. So it was like 5 a.m. on a work day. And I read baby boy. And I was like, this is not the gender reveal party that I had ever envisioned for myself.
Mhm.
Now I'm supposed to go to work and I don't even know how to feel about that because I had never known the gender of a child of mine. And God, it was so complicated. But it really gave me a lot of closure, I think, to know finally, like, am I a boy mom? Like, am I a girl mom? I never really knew. And I just let my instincts guide me. But now having like some evidence, it just made me feel like, do you see the words boy? It was crazy. Um, but that was in May. And, June, I took the month to recover in that postpartum period. And kind of now we're in July. And I did an egg retrieval the beginning of July. And I got one day 5 embryo. I'm still waiting on the PGT results for that. And then I am on stim day, 3 will be my night meds for another, because I was advised to do retrievals in a row for the diminished reserve. And it was World IVF Day, only yesterday, I think it was, maybe the day before.
Yeah.
And I'm like, gosh, IVF like multiple times over to have just still such low outcomes and know that I'm spending every last dollar I have for a chance. For some people, it looks like it just looks so different. And it's like, gosh, IVF has been so hard for us too. And it's not a definitive yes. It's our chance. It's how we have a chance.
Yep. Yep. I wanted to just say so much all throughout that. I mean, I think the ADA that you shared, I didn't know that. I think that I want to, I would thank you for highlighting that. That's incredible. Oh my gosh, so much. My husband and I just recorded an episode just yesterday, and we found out almost very similarly about the gender and sex of our child with no warning. And we talk about how difficult that is and how validating, to your point. Okay, I'm a boy mom. Ours was also a boy. But also how much more, and I know, Amanda, you've experienced that, how much more devastating it kind of makes it too, just to be like, whoa, it just brings all of the emotions flooding in at once. But thank you, Rebecca. I cannot thank you enough, just as a person going through recurrent pregnancy loss, finding your page. The things that you share so regularly are clearly from the heart, and how you walk through it. And I resonate with every single post. So keep doing it. I know that, this month is going to continue to be difficult for you as you go through another round of IVF, but Amanda and I cannot thank you enough for sharing your story on our podcast, and then continuing to create a community and platform for others to feel invited to share their story and just feel a part of something.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you guys for what you do, because I was that woman looking for a podcast that could relate. And I found yours actually long before this RPL Mom was even in my mind at all. So thank you guys. It's meaningful, and I appreciate the space and time.